Good luck. Hello, Justin. Hello, Josiah.
My name is Michaela Smith. I'll be your first affirmative speaker. Thank you for judging.
Hi, Grayson Smith, second affirmative speaker. Thank you for judging.
Hi,
Grayson Smith, second affirmative speaker. Thank you for judging.
Thank you so much.
Grayson Smith, second affirmative speaker. Thanks for making it today. Thank you for time.
Do you mind if I...
Thank you so much.
No problem.
Thank you, Josiah.
Whoever gets the best copy will share it.
So before we begin the round, we each of the judges might sharing with us any experience you have judging and anything you'd like us to do specifically or not to do specifically in the debate round.
This is my 7th year as a judge. Team policy is probably what I have the most experience in.
Okay.
And I'm a stock issues judge, and I appreciate good signposting. It helps my flow.
I'm a parent judge. I want to know what the problem is, if it's a big problem, and if you can solve it.
Okay.
And signposting helps a great deal.
I'm a parent judge as well. I have flow. I'll be a listener this time.
All right. Thank you so much.
All my judges are ready.
Thank you.
On February 11, 2013, North Korea conducted a third nuclear test to threaten the United States. The test follows threats from the North to build up its nuclear capacity and carry out an all-out action of high intensity. It is the clearest sign that North Korea prefers to confront the United States and its allies rather than make peace with them. End quote. The Washington Post, February 2013. The intentions of North Korea's government are clear. With very recent satellite, rocket, and nuclear tests, they are moving closer to fully developing a long-range nuclear warhead. Therefore, my partner and I stand resolved that the United States federal government should substantially reform its foreign military presence and their foreign military commitments. Before moving forward, let's define a couple of terms relating to missile defense. Definition 1, mid-course defense. Mid-course defense. Mid-course defense fires interceptors at a missile while it is flying through space. We currently deploy ground-based mid-course missile defenses, also known as GMD. Definition 2, boost phase defense. Boost phase defense. Boost phase interceptors shoot down a missile while it is still in the launch cycle before leaving the atmosphere. They travel very fast and knock the missile off course before it can enter fully powered flight. They are carried on a drone, which is an unmanned aerial vehicle, also referred to as a UAV. While the needed technologies are developed, we currently do not deploy boost phase defense. Now let's look at a couple of reasons why our current mid-course missile defense is ineffective. Fact, failed system. Failed system. GMD fails to protect us for 2 reasons. The first is of countermeasures. When a country launches a warhead, they equip it with decoys and distractions in order to mislead the interceptor. Once the missile has left the atmosphere and dispersed its payload, the countermeasures are deployed. These countermeasures beat our system. The second reason is that our missile defense tests are rigged. They are not set up in a real-world scenario, and they do not include countermeasures. This was all explained by Yusuf Booth, PhD in nuclear physics, when he said in December of 2010 that, quote, countermeasures remain one of the biggest technical challenges for our current missile defense systems. GMD can be defeated with simple decoy warheads and other cheap countermeasures. Additionally, it has never been tested in a realistic setting. GMD has had a particularly bad test record, having failed regularly, even in highly scripted tests, end quote. Let's break down that piece of evidence and examine what it tells us. Firstly, countermeasures beat the current system. Secondly, our tests are not realistic. And thirdly, GMD fails even in the rigged tests. It's very clear that in the status quo, we are not protected. Now let's examine the primary nuclear threat facing the United States on our harm. North Korean threat. North Korean threat. For years, North Korea has been building a nuclear program. Let's examine this threat in 2 subpoints. Subpoint A, strike capability. Strike capability. Their nuclear test just last month proves the significant progress they have made on their nuclear program. CNN reported on February 13, 2013 that, quote, North Korea pushed the button on its 3rd underground nuclear test, this time using more sophisticated technology than its previous attempts. Anytime the North Koreans stage a test, it significantly improves their progress. This test comes after they staged a rocket launch in December that was successful. This test is a significant step forward, end quote. North Korea is moving swiftly toward a nuclear warhead to equip on an ICBM, an intercontinental ballistic missile. According to most estimates, North Korea will have a nuclear warhead capable of hitting the West Coast by 2016, within 3 years. Millions of lives are at risk. This poses an unacceptable threat to our citizens. So will North Korea strike? We'll examine that in our subpoint B of strike of irrational actor. North Korea's hostile stance toward the United States produces their irrational policy making. They wish to strike the U.S. with a nuclear warhead, and they will stop at no means to achieve that goal. In fact, just last month, the government of North Korea released a propaganda video of the U.S. being hit by a nuclear warhead. The U.S., they claim, is the sworn enemy of the Korean people. Even more alarming is a recent development in their hostile stance toward the U.S. Just last month, North Korea publicly declared their intention to strike the United States with a nuclear warhead. Let's take a look at this report from the NBC News on the March 7th, that's 7th of March, that says, quote, North Korea announced Thursday that it could launch a preemptive nuclear strike against the United States in the face of new UN sanctions. This is escalation of their increasingly aggressive stance toward the U.S. Experts note that their recent advances in its nuclear weapons program means that such bellicose rhetoric cannot be taken lightly, end quote. North Korea wants to see the United States reduced to ash. They're threatening to strike us, yet we do not have a defense capable of protecting our citizens. Therefore, my partner and I propose the following plan to adjust our defense system. Plan, boost phase defense. Boost phase defense. Upon an affirmative ballot, the government will assemble and deploy 5 boost phase stealth drone ICBM intercept vehicles in airspace over the Sea of Japan to cover all of North Korea. Any maintenance or refueling will be done at already existing bases in Japan and South Korea. Through the standard of best available technology, the Department of Defense, DoD, will decide which interceptors and drones to use as a standard procedure. Funding will be an average of $500 million per year, adding up to $10 billion over 20 years. Agency and enforcement will come from Congress, the President, DoD, and any other needed government agencies. We reserve the right to clarify any part of the plan if needed. Let's now examine how boost-phase interceptors will be successful in protecting the United States and our allies to a solvency point. Solvency, effective defense. Effective defense. There are several reasons why boost-phase interceptors are an effective missile defense system. The primary one is that countermeasures cannot be deployed during boost phase, so we are striking the missile down at its most vulnerable stage. George Lewis, PhD in experimental physics, and Theodore Postel, professor of science, technology, and national security policy at the MIT, said in November 2010, quote, drones will carry high-speed and fast-accelerating missiles that could shoot down long-range ballistic missiles shortly after they are launched and before they begin deploying their countermeasures. It will be possible while patrolling outside the borders of North Korea to shoot down an ICBM with its nuclear warhead at existing launch sites anywhere in the country. Quote, drone defenses work. Let's now look at the benefits of an affirmative ballot with our advantage. Advantage, protection, protection. This new upgraded system will protect us from a North Korean threat. Patrick M. Cronin, Senior Director at the Center for Near American Security, said on April 16, 2012, quote, we can defeat North Korea's unacceptable missile program by developing boost-based intercept capabilities based on proven technologies. We can plug the gap in missile defenses, end quote. The affirmative team has the backing of many experts who agree that boost-based missile defense is ultimately the best way to defend against enemy missiles. This advantage leads to the following impact of lives saved. Impact, lives saved. Voting affirmative will employ a reliable and effective missile shield. The updated technology and strategy that drones provide will ensure that our nation is secure. North Korea is aggressively pursuing an ICBM. Not only was their recent test a success, they are reportedly planning another test this year, with intelligence indicating that they may be setting one up right now. Our enemy is planning to attack us, and yet we sit idly by, refusing to pursue the best possible defense for our nation. My partner and I believe that we must do better. Let's approve this updated system and choose to safeguard our country against this very real threat. Thank you, and I now stand ready for any questions the negative speaker may have.
I suppose we have a timer. I'm not used to that. All right, are you ready? All right. Hey, Michaela, how are you?
I'm doing great, Josiah. How are you?
I'm doing just fine. Congratulations, of course, on breaking 2 quarterfinal rounds, and especially this early in the morning. All right, so first of all, can I have a copy of your winnings?
Of course.
Thank you very much. Now, also, you talked about how this is a high threat situation, correct? North
Yes.
Korea is an extremely dangerous threat.
Absolutely, yes.
Didn't they claim to find unicorns under their palace roughly 2 years ago?
Perhaps they did claim that, but that's really irrelevant to the situation. It
Okay.
proves how irrational and crazy North Korea really is.
Okay. Well, I suppose that does go hand in hand with their threat to blow up the sun in 2008. So let's look at your definition of boost phase intercept. Now, basically, how long is this period where the intercept can take place?
Well, the boost phase is about 5 minutes.
5 minutes, really?
Well, roughly about 2 to 3 to 4 minutes. So we have the specific numbers back at the table.
Okay, 2 to 4 minutes? Oh.
Maybe 4 minutes, yeah.
Okay, so in a high threat situation, should we assume the worst or the best?
We should assume the worst from the nuclear threat.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, and under your factor, failed systems. Now, you talked about how ground-based interceptors couldn't hit the decoys. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the
You
question?
basically talked about how the ground-based missile defense that we have right now cannot hit the missile as it travels through space because
Yes,
it has
correct.
decoys. Now, if we had many interceptors, would it be able to hit all the decoys?
No, because the countermeasures that are deployed, there will be many countermeasures. So
Imagine-
we have absolutely no guarantee that we will
Okay.
be able to get rid of them.
So if we had 6 interceptors and 5 decoys, how would, if every interceptor hit a decoy, how would that not work?
Well, as I said, you can't guarantee that we will be able to hit the decoys. But as we said, mid-course is fundamentally flawed in its
All right.
conception, so we need to switch
All right, well, let's move on from there. And your threat of the North Korean strike. Now, you talked about how they have strike capabilities right now. Now, did you provide any evidence they actually have an ICBM right now?
They do not have an ICBM
Okay.
right now. They're in the process of getting that, and they will have one in 2016.
Okay, 2016 is the time frame. All right, perfect.
Correct.
All right, and you talked about your plan, or also, you talked about how they are completely crazy and irrational. I suppose that does make sense considering their absurd threats. Now, does it work to threaten someone or to threaten retaliation?
What exactly do you mean?
If you are to threaten someone before they can carry out their strike and present them with basically the threat of denial and failure, is that more effective than retaliation after the fact?
I'm not exactly sure where you're going with that question. I don't really understand what you're asking.
All right, well, we'll move on from there. And under your plan of a boost phase missile defense, now, you talked, how many drones are you using again?
5 drones.
Okay, 5 drones, and those will be basically en route, I assume, in a uniform kind of pattern.
They'll be hovering over the airspace of the Sea of Japan. Yes.
Okay, and what area of the Sea of Japan? Closer to North Korea, closer to Japan, upper, lower, what kind of area? Just everywhere?
Kind of just over the Sea of Japan. It'll be closer to
Okay.
North Korea, but it won't be anywhere near North Korea's airspace. So,
Okay, great. All right, and under your solvency now, your funding, how much funding was needed again?
a $500 million per year, adding up to about $10 billion over 20 years.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, and under your best technology, now let's assume that the government decides to reduce the debt and we pass a plan to reduce the debt without providing any specifics. Should we send it to the Congressional Budget Office and say, everyone agrees we should reduce the debt, and then expect the Congressional Budget Office to pass whatever plan they can decide?
Well, that's a completely irrelevant situation since
Really?
that is an extremely vague plan. If we just said to Congress, we want you to reduce the deficit, that's already happening in the status quo. So
Well,
it's
then let me ask you something specific and not vague. What drone are you using?
we're not it's completely decided upon that. We're going to let the Department of Defense to decide.
Like we
when
would let the
we're-
Congressional Budget Office decide how to reduce our debt?
You could say that, sure.
Okay, what interceptor are you using?
We're not. We're going to let the Department of Defense choose the interceptor since they're more credible to discuss this issue than teenagers.
Okay, all right, but we're trying to be the experts and quoting experts to decide what kind of policy to pass, correct?
Yes, correct. But we should let the Department of Defense choose the
Okay.
best interceptor and drone.
So we
That's
should
going
pass
to
a
be
plan
best
that
for
says-
protecting our country.
So we should pass a plan that says shoot down missiles within the new space with the drones, but we don't know what technology we're using.
Yes, because the Department of Defense is credible
Okay.
for choosing this
All
technology.
right. And then under your solvency point of an effective defense, now your basically your evidence said that the boost phase has no countermeasures because the boost phase ends and the countermeasures begin after the boost phase, correct?
That's correct.
All right, perfect. So it's talking about how the interceptors, well, the decoys don't exist during your period of flight.
Yes, it's completely impossible
All right, that
to
makes sense.
deploy them in these space.
All right, and under advantage of protection, or actually I already asked you what technology you were using. Actually, I think that's all the questions that I have, so thank you very much, Michaela.
Thank you.
everyone is ready to go? And as his brother might say, in my vast audience, wonderful. What is the affirmative team's plan? It is to use drone missile defense. Now, what exactly is a drone? The Free Dictionary defines it on March 15th of 2013, quote, drone, a noun, a male honeybee that is characteristically stingless, performs no work, and produces no honey. This is the philosophy of the negative team. Their policy is to use a drone defense that is characteristically stingless, performs no work, and produces no honey whatsoever. So that's just a funny intro saying that their policy is not a good idea. Now, I want to start out with the criterion of best missile defense. Best missile defense. So obviously North Korea is something of a problem. They're very angry. There was recently the front page of the Economist article said Korean roulette. Obviously they're a problem. So what we're going to be looking at here is a counter proposal. It's saying what is actually the best way to solve it. Instead of just saying, the affirmative might say, well, our drone technology isn't that amazing, but as long as there's a 1% chance of us being able to shoot it down, it's better than a 0. You should be given the option of having a defense that's not 1% versus 0, but 1% versus 90%. So that's what we should be pursuing. Now, before I get into that, I want to get into a few quick arguments talking about their fact. First of all, when will they have an international continental ballistic missile? My second response is they talked under their fact about, they cited Yusuf Butt talking about different missile defense, and actually it says in the evidence, none of the various missile defenses, systems, sea or land-based, have ever been tested in a realistic setting. Now, drones also, you could call it drone missile defense, but they're also land-based as well. Moving down onto their plan. Now, they claim to use best available technology, or BAT. The problem is, we don't know what this best available technology is. They say the DoD is credible. Are they really? I mean, have they always been credible? Have they always made the right decision? Or is this technology truly going to be amazing? What kind of technology is this? We don't have any specifics. We're passing a plan with no specifics. Let's move on to their argument about subpoint B under their harm of an irrational actor. They're not actually an irrational actor, though sometimes they do like to chase their unicorns. The problem is there's mutually assured destruction. Basically, if they strike the United States is going to strike them. North Korea is not a suicidal country unless they can prove it. So at the best, there's only a risk of this danger. Now, also, under their solvency point of countermeasures, their countermeasures only apply to long-range missiles. It does not apply to short-range missiles, which is something North Korea would probably use against South Korea, since North Korea has told South Korea that they are their sworn enemy. Now, I want to get into my first solvency point, and sorry I'm going fast, but I have a lot of arguments to make. There's basically more shots are better. No missile defense is absolutely perfect. So basically, the more shots we can get off, or more interceptors we can get off, and the more opportunity we have to intercept that missile. Solvency point number 2 is basically the same department that was testing the mid-course defense also tested their drone defense. So does that mean their drone defense is credible? No. The exact same department that they claim is uncredible tested their own defense, and then they claim that their defense is very effective. So let's move on to our counter plan. Our counter plan is that of a railgun defense. Counter plan is a railgun defense. Let's first define what a railgun is. This is from the U.S. Office of Naval Research, 2012. Quote, the electromagnetic railgun is a long-range weapon that fires projectiles using electricity instead of chemical propellants. Magnetic fields created by high electrical currents accelerate a sliding metal conductor between two rails to launch projectiles at 4,500 miles per hour to 5,600 miles per hour. Unquote. Basically, it's an electromagnetic cannon. They were just recently made, and they are incredibly powerful. They are the most effective means of missile defense we have today. So let's look at our counter proposal, the best way to solve the problem we have today. The subpoint A of the plan is basing. Under a negative ballot, the United States military will station 5 M20 Blitzer railguns, each on its own SSGN Ohio-class submarine, or Zumwalt-class destroyer, in the water off both coasts of South Korea, each loaded with 1,000 rocket booster Blitzer airburst anti-missile interceptor rounds. The subpoint, basically we're going to put this railgun defense in place. Subpoint B is the funding. $1 billion for the plan, as well as any other costs, will be pulled from the affirmative team's plan. The basically normal means, so we're using the same kind of funding that the affirmative team is using. The C is timeline. The defensive operations will commence immediately upon a negative ballot. Now let's get into some advantages, or the counterplan advantages. I like to tag this as CPADV, or just CPA is easier. Subpoint A of our advantage of an effective defense. An effective defense. Subpoint A is shredded missiles. These missiles will literally be shredded to pieces. Captain Edward H. Lundquist, citing Thomas Hearn, Director of Advanced Weapon Launcher Systems for General Atomics, May of 2011. Quote, sensors track the target and the outgoing railgun projectile and command the projectile to intercept the incoming threat. The projectile would be an airburst round and deploy tungsten penetrators near the target to enhance the probability of kill. The blitzer round would be guided using GPS and inertial navigation system. So basically what happens is they're guided by the GPS, and they're very powerful, made out of tungsten, the heaviest metal on the planet, that basically blows through the missile altogether. Subpoint B is intercepted in seconds. Intercepted in seconds. This is from the Department of Homeland Security, December of 2010. Quote, the Blitzer launch package can reach the horizon in seconds. This allows for engagement of threats much quicker and farther away than current systems, having the ability to replace multiple systems in the current layered defense approach. A railgun slug from the Blitzer accelerating down the rails is traveling at Mach 5 far sooner than a current interceptor, could reach out and touch an inbound missile much more quickly. So basically it's saying the railgun is better than any other defense we've had so far. Subpoint C is just talking about how it can shoot very fast. Each railgun, which we will be placing 5 for defending against North Korea, each railgun can shoot 10 shots, 10 rounds per second, 10 rounds per minute. The affirmative team's policy, the affirmative team's drone defense, doesn't even come close to that. Let's get into some solvency points actually with their policy. Solvency point number 3 is countermeasures. Solvency point number 3, like mid-course missile defense, they also suffer countermeasures. This is from Wade Bosey, Research Director at the Association of Arms Control Specialists in Missile Defenses, February of 2004. Quote, the American Physical Society study has warned that the United States boost phase defenses could have to contend with various enemy countermeasures, such as rocket-propelled decoys. And one last solvency point number 4 is that drones are incapable. Air Force Colonel Mike Corbett in summer of 2010, quote, this mission places a new demand on combat aircraft. The mission requirements of ground alert and in some cases airborne persistence, as well as the possible penetration of defended airspace would impose a significant burden on today's combat air forces. In the future, aircraft like the Navy's proposal unmanned combat air system could have mission durations of 100 hours and a very low radar signature. Basically what this complicated piece of evidence is saying is that it's not going to be able to work well under high stress scenarios like the threat of North Korea. Thank you so much.
How are you doing today, Justin?
I'm doing wonderful. How about yourself?
I'm doing wonderful too. Now, just a few questions about your speech. Now, first off, would you agree that in the real world, if our plan were to be passed, then the Department of Defense would choose upon the specifics of the policy, not Congress?
The Department of Defense, I mean, that's what you would mandate. Congress would allocate that job to the Department of Defense. My question actually was not the credibility of Congress, it was the credibility of the Department of Defense. Does the Department of Defense always make the right decisions?
Okay, thank you. Moving on to the fact-to-fail system, would you agree that our drones in our plan are air-based, not sea or land-based?
Air-based in the terms of, like,
That they stay in the air, hovering in the
Well,
air.
the drones are in the air, just like an interceptor would fly in the air, but the basing, where the drones actually come from, is land. Unless you have a specific piece of evidence saying they're airborne based, and that's different from what your expert was saying,
Okay.
that would certainly be helpful.
All right, thank you. Moving on, if North Korea were to strike the United States with a nuclear warhead, would it be a long-range nuclear warhead?
The United States? Yes, it would be a long range.
All right, thank you. Moving on, now, does the Missile Defense Agency have any motivation to rig the tests of the boost phase interceptors?
Well, they would obviously have the same motivation as they would have for mid-course. The motivation would be, basically, if they can't produce any missile defense, they're out of work.
Okay, thank you. Now, could I have a copy of your plan text, please?
Yes. You can ask another question.
All right, thank you. Now, are railguns completely developed in the status quo?
Yes.
They are. Did you read these evidence for this in your speech?
I don't believe I read a specific piece of evidence saying they've developed, but I've read evidence saying this is what they do, so it obviously implies that they're developed. But we do have that evidence.
Okay, could you read that in your next speech, possibly?
If you make an argument out of it, we will respond to it.
All right. Now, did you bring up a piece of evidence about how the counterplan would be effective against ICBM, specifically the railguns?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Sure. Did you bring up a piece of evidence about how your counterplan, the railgun specifically, would be effective against North Korean ICBMs?
Yes, it would be very effective. It basically can shoot 80 shots all together when you combine it over the time period that it would have to cross.
Right. But did you read a piece of evidence for this in your speech, though?
I did read a piece of evidence talking about how effective it is.
Right, but specifically to North Korean ICBMs.
I'm not sure if I read specifically that piece of evidence. I believe we have it back at the table.
Right, thank you. Now, where will you be stationing the railguns?
Stationing the railguns, well, basically we'll have 3, I believe, in South Korea on the northern border of South Korea, and 2 on the side on, I believe, nuclear power submarines. My partner knows more about the specifics, and we have the mandates that we just gave.
Okay, thank you. Now, one last question. Did you bring up a specific piece of evidence saying that North Korea can do countermeasures in the blue space?
Well, naturally, North Korea is able to produce countermeasures for mid-course, if that's your argument. It doesn't seem illogical that they could also not do it for the boost phase. We have another piece of evidence also saying that it's very easy to do this. They're a dedicated adversary, if it's true as you say, so they would be able to do that, yes.
All right, thank you. No further questions.
Thank you so much.
All right, judges ready? And the timer? And your team? Yeah. All right. Now that the U.S. is set to light a fuse for nuclear war, the revolutionary armed armies of North Korea will exercise the right to a preemptive nuclear attack to destroy the strongholds of the aggressors and to defend the supreme interests of the country. That is a press release by the North Korean foreign government last month. It specifically details the situation that North Korea is a threat to the United States. We need the best missile defense possible to protect the United States. That's why we're proving in this speech that the affirmative plan is the best missile defense possible. In response to their criteria, they said best missile defense. I, for the most part, agree. However, under the counterplan, we're going to be looking at some theory arguments as to how the counterplan doesn't hold up when it comes to standard protocol of team policy debate. But after that, yes, we will consider whether or not missile defense of the affirmative plan or the negative ballot is justified. So before we get to the counterplan, let's turn to the arguments against the fact and the harm. Against the fact, they had 2 arguments. First of all, that the drone tests must be rigged too because the drones start on the land. I have 2 responses. First of all, current defenses. That evidence was about the missile defense that the U.S. currently deploys. We don't have boost phase currently deployed, so his argument doesn't apply at all. But secondly, they're in the air. Drones are in the air, not on the ground. We specifically mandate to put them over the sea if you can, so his argument here doesn't apply. He secondly said that North Korea could only do countermeasures on long range. I'm not sure exactly how this applies, because first of all, if this argument is true, it undermines both the counterplan and the affirmative plan. But secondly, our plan is supposed to protect the United States. Now, it does defend South Korea and our allies as well, but specifically, North Korea wishes to strike the United States. When they fire a nuclear war to the United States, our current defenses can't defend, and neither can the negative plan, which we'll be seeing in a couple of moments. They thirdly said against the harm. They said, when will North Korea have nuclear weapons? 2016. Mikhail said it in the 1AC. Moving on to the next argument that mutually assured destruction solves. Essentially, that the idea that we can fear North Korea into not striking us is going to help the United States. 2 responses. First of all, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. North Korea is a very irrational government, which both teams agree to, and they actually will strike the United States. But secondly, even if this argument is true, it undermines the counterplan as well. Every argument the negative team makes against the harm of a North Korean threat undermines their counterplan if they believe it is true, because their counterplan is intended to defend the United States and our allies. But if they're claiming North Korea won't strike, then the counterplan isn't justified. With that address, let's turn to the counterplan before we go to the solvency points. Actually, quickly on the issue of best available technology, the technology that we use with our plan, they said the Department of Defense is incredible. Two responses. First of all, real world. Real world. In the real world, congressmen do not discuss missile defense technological specifics. They discuss which system. Then they pass a bill. Then the Department of Defense and the Missile Defense Agency decide which technology to use. The names of the technology, given they know the details of it a lot better than Congress, and obviously a lot better than us four debaters around. In the real world, that's how it works, so we believe we should emulate the real world with our plan. My second response is that of a better debate. A better debate. We actually believe that a higher quality debate will go on if we discuss the concept of boost phase versus the concept of missile defense, as opposed to spending the whole debate talking about specific technology, whether the NKVL will work or whether the NK will work. I think that actually discussing technological concepts is a lot more educational than discussing just one technology. Given in the real world, we discuss concepts instead of just the specific technologies. Let's move down now to his counterplan before the solvency points. Now, his counterplan is to use railgun missile defense. Before getting to the specifics, I have two generic responses to the counterplan. Firstly, a topical counterplan. A topical counterplan. Now, the resolution states the United States federal government should substantially reform its foreign military presence and or foreign military commitments. In the team policy rules, it states that if the resolution is upheld, the affirmative ballot is merited. Now, if the negative team upholds the resolution for us, that's great. All it means is that the affirmative ballot is passed. The negative plan is a reform of our foreign military presence and or commitments, given against putting missile defense in another country to defend the United States. So the negative team actually upholds the resolution. The negative team has proven the resolution true, thus that justifies the affirmative ballot. Even if you agree with the counterplan, all it does is justify the affirmative ballot, given it proves the resolution true. My second response is no clash. No clash. My argument here is that it's possible for the two plans to happen at the same time. Now, what a counterplan is supposed to be is essentially an opportunity cost disadvantage. It's supposed to be a better policy that can't be done under the affirmative plan. But if you examine these two policies, they can both be done under the affirmative and the negative ballot, so it's not a legitimate counterplan any team policy debate around. With that address, let's turn down to some specifics. First of all, on the issue of the railguns in general, I have one response that technology isn't ready. The technology isn't ready. In fact, the railgun is still going to be going through testing through 2017. Let's take a look at a piece of evidence from this for AOL Defense, a U.S. Defense news source in February 2012. Quote, an electromagnetic railgun will go through extensive trials through 2017, unquote. So the railgun they talk about is still going to be going through trials and the development in 2017. When's North Korea going to strike? In 2016. Their defense isn't ready in time. Let's turn to their funding. My response is that of no numbers. The negative team didn't actually give any numbers as to what their funding will be. They just said we steal the affirmative team's funding, but I would ask them to actually bring up some clarification here. Their advantage of effectiveness, my one response is no specific evidence. The negative team didn't read any evidence that their plan would actually defend against North Korea. Our evidence was specific to U.S. missile defense against North Korea. The negative evidence wasn't, so the specific evidence should be preferred. Now let's turn to one disadvantage against the counterplan that proves the counterplan is actually going to be counterproductive. The disadvantage is that of Chinese aggression. Chinese aggression. In fact, the railguns that the negative team is proposing could actually be used against China's military. From Richard D. Fisher, a senior fellow at the International Assessment and Strategy Center, in 2012 he said, quote, as an anti-invasion defense, a force of 10 blitzers could pose an unacceptable threat to the potential People's Liberation Army of China force of hundreds of formal and informal invasion craft, unquote. So what does this mean? Essentially, the U.S. and China are going through tensions now. What the counterplan does is it puts, in 2017, it puts this railgun system near China. This is only going to increase tension with China, increase the escalation, and in fact is going to make cooperation and relations with China very difficult to manage. Let's turn to the solvency point. The solvency point 1 was that the more shots, the better. My response is technology. We believe that whichever technology is the best should win the debate round, and whichever technology can defend the United States soonest and in time should win the debate round. The solvency point 2 was that of the MDA testing. My response is motivation. Motivation. The reason the Missile Defense Agency rigs the test of our current defense is because they want the world to think that the United States is secure. They don't want to report to the whole world that we're currently vulnerable. They have no motivation, however, to rig the boost phase test because we currently don't deploy boost phase defense. And additionally, even if the testing is rigged no matter what, it's also rigged under the counterplan. All their generic arguments here apply, if they're true, apply to both the plan and the counterplan. The solvency point 3 was that of countermeasures in the boost phase. I have two responses. First, not possible. not possible. It is not possible to do countermeasures in the boost phase given the payload isn't dispersed until after the missile has left the atmosphere, as the evidence in the 1AC said. But specifically, North Korea can't do countermeasures in the boost phase. George Lewis, PhD in experimental physics in 2012, quote, "New information has become publicly available about missiles under development by North Korea. Nations with limited technical and industrial capabilities are incapable of implementing effective countermeasures against boost phase," unquote. So North Korea can't do it. But additionally, even if they could, it undermines the counterplan as well, because the counterplan is going to strike down the missiles in the early phase, but additionally, even if it strikes us in the mid phase, it's susceptible to countermeasures. The counterplan is susceptible to countermeasures, the affirmative plan isn't. Their final solution point was that drones are incapable. Two responses. First, no reason. The negative team didn't give any reason as to why drones work. They just read a generic piece of evidence that drones aren't really effective, but they gave no reasons. My second response is drone technology. Patrick Cronin, who we quoted in the 1AC, said in 2012, quote, "Enabled by the revolution in UAVs, boost phase interceptor based on off-the-shelf technology can be deployed in the operationally feasible stations on the periphery of North Korea," unquote. The plan is proven, the counterplan isn't. That's why we asked for the affirmative ballot. Thank you. And a moment for any questions from any speaking I have.
Alright, Grayson, I'm going to dive right into the questions here.
Right.
Now, one of your first disadvantages, you talked about the issue of China. Now, I think that's a really important issue to deal with. However, I have a few questions. First of all, what is China's calculus right now? Does China actually support North Korea?
In the current, it's a confusing issue. China doesn't want North Korea to strike the United States with a nuclear weapon. They've been supporting U.S. sanctions against North Korea.
Yes.
My argument was that the railguns could be turned to destroy China's military.
Okay,
under the
I see.
counterplan.
No, certainly. I mean, if that was true, that'd be an important issue.
Yeah.
Now,
Did you
should
say
I
you want to see
that?
the evidence?
Yes.
This is the bottom one.
Okay, wonderful. Now, is this specific to our plan?
Specific to the blitzers, which you mandated.
Okay, and how many Blitzer railguns did it say it was putting in place?
10. I believe you do 5, so it's the United States is under your
Okay.
counterplan halfway there to destroying China's entire army.
Does it matter where we position them? Do Blitzer railguns, I mean, it might be cool if they had infinite range, but do they have infinite range, and does it matter where
Well,
we
you said
position
you put
them?
them on. You said you put half of them on ships, which means they're mobile. So you could just sail the ship toward China to destroy their army.
Okay, in theory. Now you also talk about, or basically, so again, both teams would agree that China does want North Korea to strike South Korea or the United States.
China does not want North Korea to strike the U.S. or South Korea.
Why is that so?
Because, well, for the United States, we are a huge trading partner for China. Their economy would not be able to survive if not for the
so
United
what would
States.
devastate China?
If the United States was struck by a nuclear weapon, yes. It would
Okay.
devastate China. It would devastate the global economy. The United States is one of the key components of the global economy, keeping it together. If the U.S. was struck by a nuclear weapon, China would definitely be devastated.
For sure, I totally agree. Now you're also talking about the topical counterplan, and you've agreed to our criterion of best missile defense, correct?
Actually, I said that this is true after I addressed the theory arguments. I said first we have to look at the theory arguments, then the counterplan. I specifically had that as a response to your criterion.
Okay, now you used the analogy under the Department of Defense being Congress. Did you use the analogy of Congress?
I used the analogy of how Congress in the real world passes the bill, and then the Department of Defense decides exactly the names of the technology to use, given they know how to keep up with drone technology.
Okay, so
that's
is
evolving.
this debate like Congress, or is it not like Congress?
This debate is like Congress.
Okay, wonderful. You also talked about the issue of basically they would have a weapon by 2016. I may have missed this, but did you bring up any specific evidence about this?
No, but it was Mikhail referenced it in the one I see. All you were asking for was
Okay.
a date, so I gave you the date.
Specifically talking about this drone technology. Now, how many seconds would it take for the drone to intercept the North Korean missile?
About 50 to 70 seconds. The
50
boost
to
phase is a
70.
couple hundred seconds.
Okay, wonderful. And I believe we're almost out of time, so thank you so much.
All right.
The challenge for boost phase intercept is that the system must intercept and destroy the target within 100 seconds of targeting. The only current technologies which which may be able to meet the 100-second engagement time, are the airborne laser and electromagnetic railguns. This isn't some man off the street. This is not one physicist. This is the Department of Physics at the U.S. Navy Postgraduate School. How recently? March 28, 2013. The only current technology, specifically the railgun, the Blitzer Electro M20 railgun, is the only technology that can adequately defend America. This is the reason why we must vote for the negative team, because it can hit intercontinental ballistic missiles. They asked it can hit North Korean missiles. Richard D. Fisher, one of the sources they cited, the deployment of railguns would be useful in deterring and defeating missile threats posed by North Korea. End quote. The railgun system assuredly works. It's faster, it's more effective, and we have a larger, more broad defense. The railgun counterplan is far superior to the affirmative team. We're going to be looking at some solvency points, talking more about how the affirmative team cannot solve the problem, and under the criterion of best defense, the negative team warrants the ballot. Solvency point number 5 of this debate round is it's too slow. Again, it's simply too slow. Let's look at evidence for this. Matt Martin, a missile defense specialist and program officer in policy analysis at the Stanley Foundation, 2012. A recent report from the American Physical Society, the nation's professional society of physicists, is very careful to limit their conclusions to technical aspects in physical analysis. But it does not take much of a stretch to draw policy conclusions such as devastating statements as intercepting missiles while their rockets are still burning would not be an effective approach for defending the United States. End quote. It goes on to say, unfortunately for us, the type of enemy missile in question is exactly the type of missile that North Korea is likely to have by the time a boost phase system is up and running. It is physically impossible to intercept fast ICBMs in their boost phase because the boost phase is too short. Intercepting and basing locations are ineffective, and decision-making would have to be nearly instantaneous. The study group investigated that all the boost phase programs, including land, sea, and air-based interceptors, what they use, space-based interceptors, and airborne laser. They studied all of those. It says, one by one, they each failed. What's not included in that evidence? Railguns. And as of March 28, 2013, railguns are the only effective intercontinental ballistic missile defense. The problem is the affirmative team's plan has been studied and proven to fail. Railguns have been proven to work. Let's look at my solvency point number 6, which is it cannot protect the mainland. Again, it cannot protect the mainland. This has to do with the position of the drones and the position of the missiles. Unfortunately, the affirmative team places their drones in the Sea of Japan. That is directly east of the Korean Peninsula. Unfortunately, the missiles in question would be traveling north over Alaska in order to get over the hemisphere. I know it looks like on a map we would be going east, but since it's a globe, they're going north. And I have 4 specific reports confirming this. Also, one from a 300-page congressionally mandated scientific report from the National Academies. I also have one from Dr. Dean Wilkening, PhD in physics. In 2004, airborne boost phase interceptors launched from a location over the Sea of Japan against hypothetical North Korean ICBMs, respectively, assuming the space-based infrared sensors, basically assuming that it can track it. The ground traces for ICBMs launched toward the East Coast, West Coast, and Hawaii are shown in the figures. I have a figure here saying that the ICBMs headed for the mainland are going north, not over the Sea of Japan, and the only ones that are going over the Sea of Japan is going towards Hawaii and Guam. The best the affirmative team can offer you is a defense from a nuclear attack against Taiwan, Hawaii or Guam. Let's look at the 300-page congressionally mandated report. A boost phase intercept 2012. A boost phase intercept might be possible if the threat is a North Korean medium or long-range missile headed towards U.S. bases in the Western Pacific, and therefore flying towards the Sea of Japan, over which boost phase intercept platforms could be stationed. In this situation, the platform proximity is manageable because the threat is coming toward the interceptor. It works like this. The only way for this extremely limited time frame to actually work for a boost phase intercept is if we have the fastest weapon, which is a railgun, stationed correctly on our map of basing locations. We have one stationed in the north, so it covers that area, and that's an overall defense that will always be there, so we don't have to send a drone out. And there's also the fact that it says the only way it's going to work is if it's going towards a U.S. base in the Pacific, because only if it's going towards a U.S. base in the Pacific is it going east, not north. It cannot hit a missile going north. And I have 4 studies independently proving this to be true. It actually outlines which city it would be hitting per trajectory. You can take a look at those after the round if you so desire. But if that's not enough to beat the affirmative team's case, I'd like to bring up a disadvantage. The reason why the affirmative team's plan is simply a bad idea. Nuclear debris. The disadvantage is nuclear debris. Obviously, when you hit a missile, it doesn't just vaporize, disappear, and poof, nowhere, kind of like North Korea's unicorn. Unfortunately, the debris and the rest of the missile go somewhere. The problem is the nuclear warhead does too. Let's look at the counterplan unique list, which is subpoint A. The counterplan doesn't link. And my partner already covered this because we shred the entire missile. Not only do we shred the entire missile with one shot, but we have 80 shots per missile. We have 80 chances to completely shred a missile into parts that are roughly the size of a toothpick. So let's look at subpoint B, which is longer time equals more spread. Again, longer time equals more spread. As the missile lifts off, the faster you hit it, the less momentum it has going. So when you hit it, the debris doesn't go as far. Theodore A. Postal, actually one of the people that they cited in the report where he advocated the drone system and basically gave a chart for how far it would go by the time you intercept it. The affirmative team intercepts it after much of a long time after the negative team's counterplan. Unfortunately, this is bad. The railgun intercept would happen within 60 seconds. We actually have the map. It happens within 28 seconds of the launch. The affirmative team happens roughly 200 seconds or 100 seconds. Let's look at the 300-page congressionally mandated scientific study under subpoint 3, which is it must kill the warhead. In principle, kinetic boost phase interceptors could be aimed so as to impact the reentry vehicle containing the warhead, as contrasted with the booster itself. So let's just stop there. The warhead, the missile, has two parts. The nuclear warhead, which is the threat, and the booster, which is getting it there. Unfortunately, the affirmative team targets the booster because that's what their infrared interceptors that we actually don't know what they're using. Those interceptors are aimed at the exhaust and the hot burning part of the missile. Unfortunately, the warhead is on the other side. When it hits the missile without shredding it, all you hit is the booster, meaning the warhead is left unshredded. It goes on to say, because of uncertainties about the position of the reentry vehicle relative to the hot exhaust which is guiding the interceptor, ensuring such an impact would be extremely challenging. What's the impact of this? A nuclear detonation on China. Again, a nuclear detonation on China. The warhead would detonate because it is still intact if you vote for the affirmative team. This results in a nuclear detonation over China because if you calculate the results, basically how far the warhead would go by the time that they intercept it, it would not land on North Korea, it would land on China. Let's look at evidence for this. Let's look at that same report in 2012. Even a successful intercept has the shortfall problem of debris. That is, the potential for an intact and armed nuclear weapon to fall on friendly or neutral territory. By the time of intercept, which would take place relatively late in powered flight, as well as above the atmosphere, the reentry vehicle would already have sufficient velocity to continue on that trajectory and extend into friendly or neutral territory and produce a nuclear detonation on impact. Unfortunately, the affirmative team, while well-meaning, uses unproven technology, and the negative team gives you the only defense, railgun missile defense. Thank you.
All right, hey Josiah, how are you?
I'm doing just fine. How are you, Grayson?
I'm doing great. I've got a couple questions. First of all, can I get the two first pieces of evidence you read in your speech?
Two first pieces of evidence from the... Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, the opening quote and then the one right after.
There you go. There's that one. That's specific to North Korea.
Okay.
And this one, let's see. And the bottom one on this page is talking about...
defending the North Korean threat.
Oh, that was the one I just handed you.
Okay, was that one specific to North Korean threat for the United States and our allies? Did it specify location?
I didn't specify location, but we have the evidence talking about from March 28, 2013, the Department of Physics at the Navy Postgraduate School saying long-range ICBMs are the only, railguns are the only way.
Right. Actually, questions about that evidence. First of all, could I get that evidence to examine?
You just handed it.
It is that one. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
The study you cited off the one by one. That study specifically, you said one by one, each of them failed, right?
Yeah,
Which
it didn't study
that,
railguns.
that study or is that a different study?
That was the APS study, the American Physical Society.
Which was the study done?
That was done, the evidence said recently, and the evidence was published in 2012, I believe.
Okay, and could we actually take a look at that piece of evidence?
Did
you actually read the piece of evidence, or are you just referring to it?
I did read it, actually.
You did read it.
Here you go.
That one. Okay, thanks. I believe that's all the evidence I need from you. Let's turn down to your Solvency 5 of 2 slope. Now, the main source you were citing here was the National Research Council report, the American report, right?
No, I did not cite that under that solvency point.